Why can't we register our fingerprints at the same time as we get a passport?
You don't need to argue with me. Argue with him.
I'm happy to go along and put my fingerprint down.
That would be our policy then, wouldn't it? This is the EU's policy.
Why are they beating us? Why are they still
They're not beating us. They're not beating us. We're beating ourselves.
Back at the beginning of September, Logistics UK published an article on their website about the looming problems for British goods and supplies going in and out of Britain because of the continuing ramping up of problems, basically pettifogging bureaucracy on our borders as a result of Brexit. However, there is one other thing that's coming, which is a decision from the European Union. They're bringing in an entry and exit system, which is going to bring more problems and more delays for people going across the border to the mainland, and also that will impact on goods. This article ensured the Telegraph then decided to publish an article saying that the European Union are threatening Christmas and our Christmas goods by bringing in, how dare they control their borders and bring in an entry-exit system. And they forgot to mention all of the barriers that we have been building up over the last few years with Brexit. Then GB News decided to write about it, and the LBC, and this is how the Brexit blame game of the European Union works, because the proper details are not in there. The truth is that the EES system is going to be the straw potentially that breaks the camel's back in terms of the borders and what goes on with our supply chains. But the ironic thing of Brexit is that because we have delayed bringing in checks for imports, we have allowed imports to undercut our British produce and encourage our farmers not to produce food, which means that we're more reliant on imports than ever before, but we're making it harder and more expensive for those imports to come in here. And screaming about the EU having the audacity to make decisions about their own borders is quite rich, quite frankly.
And this is about more misery for UK travellers heading into Europe. Fingerprint checks that will lead to delays.
Yes, this is another lucky Brexit dividend, and lucky us. Basically, what's happening is from next year, when we cross the border into Europe, which means going into France generally, we will be fingerprinted, a bit like when you go to the United States for the first time. And and so it will slow down.
It's already really slow when you...
You'll be fingerprinted.
Fingerprinted, yes. But
what about when we come back? Do we get fingerprinted?
That's up to us, probably
not. Do we fingerprint illegal and legal migrants?
I've no idea. Chances are we probably do. But look, this isn't just about us. This is what the EU is doing with all external countries, like America does with all external countries. When they started planning this, we were in the EU, so
we would be doing it.
So we would be doing it, and then we left the EU, and so now we're treated like a country that isn't in the EU, and that's our lookout.
Now he's about to say that's why Brexit was a terrible idea.
Are you going to tell me that we shouldn't have had Brexit because of fingerprinting, man?
No, not at all. No, I think there's 1,000 better reasons why we shouldn't have done Brexit.
I was going to say you reap what you sow. This is what you.
It's not a terrible thing if you go into one of the largest group of countries on the planet and you're not part of it. I think it's not that weird.
Why should they fingerprint us?
Well, the same reason they fingerprint everybody. Why shouldn't they fingerprint us?
Can I ask the obvious question, which I'd like to give myself no credit for, because Dave's just said it in my ear. Surely when you do it the first time, they've then logged your fingerprints, which quickens the system up the second time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Unless the computer breaks down.
Why can't we register our fingerprints at the same time as we get a passport?
You don't need to argue with me. Argue with him.
I'm happy to go along and put my fingerprint down.
That would be our policy then, wouldn't it? This is the EU's policy.
Why are they beating us? Why are they still punishing us?
They're not beating us. We're beating ourselves. If we wanted to be part of the Don't Get Fingerprinted club, we shouldn't have left it.
But we don't have this problem in America, do we, Steve?
We have exactly this problem in America.
Are the EU being difficult?
No. They're not doing it to us.
They are.
They're doing it to everyone. We just think it's about us because we think everything's about us.
Well,
everyone
so it's our country, man.
This is a long, slow process of punishment. We're very, very sorry that we left.
It's happening to people who are from Congo. It's happening from everyone who's not in the EU. It's not about us. Everyone.
I love you two together.
But again, these decisions about Brexit were never really explained. Right from the outset, Brexit was going to make food cheaper, it was going to make footwear cheaper, it was going to be marvellous, we were going to boom and everything was going to be great and golden. But as you remember, or maybe you don't, Dominic Raab, when he was Brexit Secretary, just have a reflect back on what he said when he suddenly realised how reliant we are on that little strip between us and the mainland. But sadly, Theresa May's deal didn't go through and we ended up with Boris Johnson and the most extreme Brexit.
We want a bespoke arrangement on goods which recognises the peculiar, frankly, geographic economic entity that is the United Kingdom. We are, and I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but if you look at the UK and you look at how we trade in goods, we're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing. And that's one of the reasons why, and there's been a lot of controversy about this, but one of the reasons why we've wanted to make sure that we have a specific and very proximate relationship with the EU to ensure frictionless trade at the border, particularly for just-in-time manufacturing goods, whether it's pharmaceutical goods or perishable goods like food. I don't think it's a question so much of the risk of major shortages, but I think probably the average consumer might not be aware of the full extent to which the choice of goods that we have in the stores are dependent on one or two very specific trade routes.
About a week or so after Logistics UK put up that article, the UK government announced that the further checks which were scheduled to come in this autumn for imports have been delayed to summer next year. This is good news for consumers because it keeps prices down and obviously keeps shortages to a minimum. However, it's bad news for farmers because of the biosecurity risks, and also it's a free-for-all for illegal imports and very bad for food poisoning, which has really gone up since Brexit because we have no control over our border really and what is coming in, which is not sufficient. The answer to these problems are solved by Britain deciding to get rid of these ludicrous red lines and working to get back within the safety of the single market and the customs union. But if we can at least get a veterinary agreement, then that would be a good start. When Brexit happened, an Indian journalist wrote an article about how Britain has become the first country to self-sanction itself. And he's absolutely spot on. Sanctions make trade more difficult, and you normally do this as a power against another nation to penalise them. But we have done this to ourselves.
Border checks are introduced today, nearly 8 years after the UK voted to leave the EU, and disruption is widely expected. Physical product inspections on flowers, meat and dairy products are likely to lead to increased costs for consumers, as well as those delays. We can talk more about this with the UK Business Head of Trade Policy at British Chambers of Commerce. That's William Bain. Very good afternoon, William.
Good afternoon.
Can we really try and imagine all of this? So can you tell us what happens to a truck tomorrow that wouldn't have been happening, say, this time last year?
So all trucks arriving from the European Union into Great Britain will have to go through something called a border control post. Now, the government is funding and running one at Ashford-Sevington, which covers Dover and Eurotunnel, which are by far the two biggest arteries, if you like, for foodstuffs coming into Great Britain from the EU. So most of the food will come through there. At other ports, there will be, which are privately run, there will be private charges plus port health charges that are levied for example, products coming into Immingham. So the key thing is pass through those border control posts. And the other element about today is that businesses will be charged for consignments that pass through those border control posts, and charged per consignment up to a capped level of £145 per consignment. And when you add that into the extra veterinary charges that came in at the end of January, you're talking about £330 in extra consignment import charges, which small and medium-sized companies have to meet, that they didn't have to meet before Christmas.
So this is the common user charge. So who's getting that money? That's going to the UK border control to man all of this? It's going straight to the Treasury? Who does that cost go to?
It will go to Treasury, and it is meant to defray the cost of introducing this physical infrastructure. So these border control posts, these units that we'll see, in terms of Sevington, it's maybe about 10 miles or so north of Dover and Eurotunnel. So it's paying for the physical infrastructure, but also for the IT infrastructure, which is backing up a lot of this. And again, why we probably won't see disruption this week is because of the scale of the workarounds on some of the IT systems that are happening in order to make sure that there's a priority of flow of goods in the short term, at least. So we're not expecting to see that much in the way of delays or disruption. But the key thing is that businesses have to get ready for the charges, because those invoices are going to drop in 12 weeks' time with bills of thousands of pounds.
Quite a few suppliers, though, have said that they are worried about their consignments simply because of how long it might take for these checks to go ahead. So a classic example has been if you are importing orchids and they've got to be kept in a truck at a very specific temperature. Actually, if you stop that truck and if there was a delay and you had to take everything off the truck in order to have this physical inspection, then actually the quality of the goods is put at risk. Is that a fair point to be making?
Absolutely right. And one of the things about the way that the checks will come in for plant products is that there is no way of forecasting whether your lorry is going to have the seals checked, be opened up completely. You'll be required to take out the trees or the saplings, and they undergo full inspections. And also for those horticultural charges, opening up the entire lorry, you could be facing a charge of £700. So at the moment, the way that the system of charging has been set up, it is potluck as to whether you're going to incur vast bills, and there's very little way that you can really legislate and plan against that.
Yeah.
In terms of those horticultural goods.
Can I ask a very obvious question? And just forgive me if this is really displaying my own ignorance, but at what point in the supply chain would these checks, which are necessary, aren't they? I mean, particularly when you're talking about things that are, part of a biosecurity kind of danger, where would those checks usually, or before this, have taken place?
Well, we've been doing checks for goods from outside the European Union on a risk-based basis for decades. What's new about today is that the extension of that principle goes to the vast amount of foodstuffs and plant products that we bring in from the European Union. So the checks have always been done really at, a border control post, infrastructure at our ports. But the issue with, as we say, Dover and Eurotunnel, the sheer quantity of food that's coming through every day to feed the nation means that special infrastructures had to be constructed near that port.
Right.
And that's going to be paid for. We accept it. So the issue is how government is making small business disproportionately pay the burden for these costs and infrastructure.
So when you talk to DEFRA about this, what is their response? And do they have a kind ear that's leaning in towards you, or completely the opposite?
Well, we haven't really had meaningful response back from DEFRA in the last weeks as to any alternative than to bring in a flat rate charge that hammers small business. And that is what the common user charge is. The EU, when they introduced controls back in 2021, did so in relation to tonnage. So the more you imported, the more you contributed. What we've got is a flat tax that hammers companies, delicatessens, the local cafe, the corner shop, bringing in everyday products that British people eat and consume every day. And they are being disproportionately asked to pay the burden of all of this new infrastructure. And that's wrong. There should be ways that government can work with industry to mitigate the impact on SMEs and make sure that hard-pressed small companies don't face hardship through no fault of their own.
A gentleman called Marco Forgione, who's Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade, says that the new system will eventually help the UK to have a world-leading border. What is a world-leading border? What does that mean to you? I mean, it sounds like a great thing to be aiming towards.
Well, I know Marco well, and, you know, what the BCC and the Institute of Exports share in common is that those aspects of the border, you know, around things like customs, trade document digitalisation, you know, we want those to be digitalised as soon as possible. And we're totally with government in terms of part of the agenda. However, what we could do in relation to these checks is negotiate a suitable agreement with the European Union as a long-term solution and cut the costs of doing trade, cut some of this virtual documentation that businesses have to prepare, cut back on some of these checks. That's the long-term solution to this. In the short and medium term, we need government to work with us on mitigating the cost impact on SMEs, which is going to be severe. And we're going to see that when those first bills drop into the email inboxes in just 12 weeks' time.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button to be alerted when I put up new videos. And do comment below. Let me know what you think.